In an unpredictable world, you can't simply wait for change to happen. We created McKinsey Live for leaders like you. Our global experts break down the need to know on the issues that matter most to decision makers and to society. We'll introduce you to leading research, new and transformational ideas, and practical knowledge and strategies, all to empower the changemakers of today, enabling you to step forward boldly, tackle real challenges, and drive change with clarity and purpose. We're helping you take control so you can drive the conversation, so you can move fearlessly, leaving no one behind, so you can take the reins to create and accelerate growth, so you can build resilience for the future. Together, we can push towards the opportunities of our era. Let's get started now.
Hello. Welcome to McKinsey Live. Today's moderator is Lucia Rahili.
Hello and welcome to McKinsey Live. I'm Lucia Rahili, McKinsey's editorial director and your host for this series of live events. Today we offer you a glimpse of what McKinsey will talk about at CES, which is of course the massive consumer electronics event held every year in the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas. As always, we view this series of live events as an opportunity to engage with our experts. So please don't hesitate to ask questions, and we'll field your questions throughout the event and answer as many as time allows when we close. Over the past few years, we have seen AI transform the virtual world, and in 2026 is poised to step out of the screen and transform the physical world as well. Take robo-taxis, long the fodder for hype. Sure, we do not have them in New York where I live yet, but in San Francisco, they're barely turning heads, if my West Coast friends are to be believed. This is a big change underway, not just for autonomous vehicles, but also for next-gen robots, and it's grounded in real advances in economics, hardware maturity, and deployment at scale. Today, we will explore that change and the ways that this kind of embodied intelligence could usher in a new era for mobility and industrials as sectors, and for all of us more generally, both in the workplace and at home, frankly. Joining us today are two of McKinsey's leading experts in these areas, Philip Kampshoff and Ani Kelkar. Philip is a senior partner based in Houston and co-leads our automotive and assembly practice. He serves clients across the mobility value chain and is also co-founder of the McKinsey Center for Future Mobility. And Ani is a partner in Boston, and he leads McKinsey's robotics and autonomy sector within our advanced industries practice. Philip and Ani, welcome to McKinsey Live. Super excited to be together with you today to talk about such a fun and forward-leaning topic.
Lucia, thanks a lot for having us. And Ani, you look sharp as always.
as a real person, not a robot today.
Just today.
Oh, you're going to bring the humanity. Let's start with some context. CES is what Americans sometimes describe as the Super Bowl of technology, and unsurprisingly, AVs and robotics are likely to be hot topics. They are like the Matthew Stafford and the Drake May of tech. Ani, you'll see I plugged New England partisanship for the American football fans in the audience. For AVs, we're approaching what many see as an inflection point. The sector is being reshaped by converging trends like applied AI, advanced connectivity, and the rise of software-defined hardware. At the same time, that cost curves for AVs are falling, which obviously helps to spur scale. And general purpose robots, a little more behind on maturity, but they are slated to follow. So Ani, talk to us. How is recent progress in AI and robotics enabling machines to bridge the gap between rapidly advancing digital intelligence and physical action? And of course, what does this mean for business leaders?
Yeah, Lucia, what a time to be alive. As someone who grew up on the Jetsons cartoons and
Yep.
reading sci-fi, I wouldn't have imagined 20 years ago that we would be on the cusp of this physical AI transformation. And I think to start with a little bit of a history lesson, the first research in AI started with the explicit purpose of making robots more functional, right? Robots have always been cool, and AI spawned as a field to make them even much more capable and dynamic and effective. And what we're seeing really over the last few years is advances in AI sort of converging with advances in robotics. And you see that across perception. So the world that the robots are able to sense is coming to life. We're seeing that in decision making. The tasks that these robots are able to perform are diversifying over time. And we're seeing that in hardware advances. So the capabilities that these robots have to do things from fine manipulation to folding laundry is expanding. And this harkens to a sort of new reality. For the last 30 years, robots have been quote unquote dumb. They have not really perceived the environment around them, and they've performed narrowly defined, repetitive tasks in sort of rigid, pre programmed sort of instruction paradigms. What we're really seeing with AI is the shift away from this high volume, high repetition to much more dynamic environments where robots are able to interpret the environment around them, form a world model view of what are the objects that it needs to manipulate, leverage language to follow instructions and collaborate with humans as teammates, not just be tools or pieces of machines. And then we're also seeing the advances in hardware mean the tasks that it can execute are rapidly expanding. And so this means increasingly we're seeing robots move from very structured environments like being fenced off in the automotive line to much more dynamic, less structured environments, whether it's chaotic picking in warehouses to increasingly showing up in elder care applications, in hospitality, in food service. And so I think this is really a moment for business leaders to take a pause and do a pulse check into their automation agenda and think about the implications of robotics for their business. And this starts from taking a task back view of the world. What are all of the physical activities we perform? And what is the unlock needed to automate those physical activities? Are we needing perception improvements? And what's the pace at which the industry is developing there? Are we needing improvements in our decision making and how the robot thinks? And are we needing improvements in control theory or actuation to make those tasks happen? And really have a finger on the pulse of those technology advances. But again, robotics, as history has shown, is not just about technology. It's about imbibing this as a capability in the organization. How do we think about the outcomes these robots will drive? How do we think about capability building of our current labor force to make sure that we elevate work and we're not doing worker replacement? We're giving people more of the problem-solving, higher value work while reducing exposure to dangerous and dirty and boring work, frankly. And we're doing this in an era where there are just systemic challenges, whether it's labor shortages or there's a mandate from the geopolitical context to reshore and bring manufacturing back to a lot of Western economies. And robotics is going to play a key role in sort of that geopolitical story as well.
Super interesting. It is like just a fascinating moment, terrifying, but fascinating at the same time. Okay, so Philip, Ani mentioned geopolitical risk at the end there as playing a role potentially in accelerating automation. What's driving growth and opportunity in autonomous mobility?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. But before we get there, unless you ask for it, Lucia, later, I do want to know from Ani talking about like the boring tasks. At what point in time are we going to have robots at homes that, fold our laundry?
Yeah, the laundry folding thing.
I really want to know that.
If we're taking a task back approach, maybe someone in the audience could address this urgently.
Exactly.
If you ask the roboticists, though, they say laundry folding is easy. So I'm getting excited for it. It's around the corner, I think.
All right. Okay.
That's good. All right, if we switch gears to autonomous, so McKinsey is tracking inorganic investments into what we call the ACEs. So these are the big mobility trends: autonomous driving, connectivity, electrification, and smart or shared mobility. Over the course of the last 10 years, we've seen about $1 trillion being invested into these four technologies, sort of in terms of inorganic investments. Now, while this is a staggering number, the really interesting thing here is that 92% of that money has actually come from outside the automotive world. 92%, which basically means OEMs and suppliers have only invested 8%, and the remaining come from private equity, venture capital, and a lot from software companies, both on the hardware as well as on the software side. And you can always go back and say, well, innovation and the speed of innovation is driven by the amount of time that you put against the problem. But in reality, it's not only the amount of time, it's the amount of resources. And if you go back 10 years, I think this is what nobody saw coming in the auto space, that so much external capital is being put against the ACEs. Now, if you see that over time, and this is what you see on the chart, and we all felt it right around 2021, 2022, those were kind of the heydays of electrification. And there was a lot of investment into that. We have seen a lot of spec deals during that time. Now, obviously, this had tapered down, at least in some of the geographies in Europe and the US a little. While I would say China is still very strong on the electrification side. But for the first time in a very long time, you see that here. Now autonomous has actually overtaken electrification. And this is something, that came a bit of a surprise, but at the same time, when you see now the first robo-taxi applications being rolled out, you see more and more real excitement out there around some of these technologies. Now, if we maybe go to the next slide, this is a fascinating analysis, probably my favorite one. This shows the question, what is cheaper for you? And this is for a city like Washington, D.C. What is cheaper for you? Using e-hailing like Uber and Lyft and these type of applications 100% of the time, or owning a car? And the answer is 2,000 miles. If you drive more than 2,000 miles in a year, it's cheaper for you to own a car and have all of the related costs, whether that is, your parking space, the depreciation, the fuel, the insurance, and so forth. If you use your car less than that, it's probably cheaper for you to just use e-hailing and, rental cars for longer distances. Now, the most expensive part in your e-hailing ride is still the driver. And this is where autonomous driving comes in. So the idea is, can we remove the driver? Can we remove that cost? Can we bring down the cost even further? And what does that do to the break-even point? This is what you see here on this chart, which is the break-even point changes from 2,000 to 7,500 miles. So now you can ask the question, how many people in Washington, D.C. are actually driving more than 7,500 miles per year? And the answer is about 50%. Or in other words, for 50% of the population in DC, from a pure economic perspective, it wouldn't make sense to own a car anymore. Just think about that. For 50% of the people in DC, it wouldn't make sense to own a car anymore. Now, we're not saying people are going to get rid of their cars. There's plenty of other reasons why you want to have a car. But on average in the US, we have roughly 2 cars per household. We expect that number to go down maybe to 1.8, 1.6, and so forth.
That is fascinating. Philip, you're single-handedly bringing the data that puts to rest dinner table debate over car ownership in New York City. I can now say McKinsey Research says, and shut it down. So let's get into some more kind of straight talk on AVs and robotaxis. We have for so long describe these vehicles as the future of mobility, but I think I'm the only person I know who's been to Atlanta but not marshaled the courage to take one of these things. What's really holding back scale in these areas, and what might the future look like if whatever these core challenges are can be overcome?
Yeah. So when we founded the MCFM, the McKinsey Center for Future Mobility, about 2014-15, one of the first articles that we put out is, how long is it going to be until we see robotaxis on the road? Back then we said, roughly it's going to be another 10 years or so. I think we are sort of right around that time frame now. We're seeing them in more and more cities now driving around. There's going to be more and more companies that offer this. So up until this point, these companies have focused on technology. And within that technology on safety, you could really say, so priorities number 1, 2, and 3 were safety, safety, safety. Because unless you have safety, anything else doesn't matter, right? So at this point in time, when we look at some of the results coming in from the robotaxi fleets, these results actually look pretty promising. Yeah, just remember, in the US alone, we have 40,000 people dying in car accidents every year. About 2.5 to 3 million visits to emergency rooms because of car accidents. We have about 150,000 or so children that get hurt in traffic accidents. So this is an important topic. And when you look at the statistics so far that we are seeing, actually safety looks pretty good. 95% of all car accidents today are caused by human error. People are, drunken driving, they're speeding, they're distracted, looking at their phones. You could make the argument a robotaxi does none of these. It doesn't drink, it doesn't speed, it doesn't look at the phone. So the first results would say we're seeing maybe a reduction of injuries, in the order of magnitude of maybe 80% or higher than that. So if you come back to these numbers, 40,000 people dying in car accidents, 150,000 children being injured. Now, this technology is really, really promising in helping to do away with that. So safety is, I think, the one single most important thing here, and we've got to protect that, and any operator needs to double down on that and make sure that's a given. Now, the second one is affordability and profitability. So today, these operations of robotaxis are still pretty expensive, depending on kind of which player you look at and how far they have scaled and so forth. But we would say easily the cost per mile could be $8 or maybe a little higher than that. And this is because most of the players have not yet focused on reducing the cost of it. Most people have focused on technology and making it safe. Now, as we're getting into the next era, cost reduction and making the economics work is going to be much more important. We believe once we looked at all of the cost elements and what you could do to optimize it and improve it, we would say you could probably take it down from over $8 to something that's somewhere between $1 and $2 per mile. So that's an 80% cost reduction that we could see until, let's say, 2035 or so. So that's going to be one of the major priorities for a lot of these players going forward. And then the last one, I would say, is around accessibility and acceptance. So making it accessible to every person that wants to use it, whether it's the elderly that don't want to drive themselves anymore, whether, it's to people in wheelchairs and so forth. So that's going to be an important one. The last one is around, acceptance. We've seen in the auto space over and over again that people have to try it to want it. If you have ADAS features, advanced driver's assistance systems, nobody has been asking for adaptive cruise control, or a head-up display or these things when they haven't tried it yet. It is about making sure that end consumers are exposed to these technologies, that we actually get people to use it at least once or twice, and hopefully they fall in love with it after they've used it. But that's going to be an important one for a lot of the robotaxi players going forward.
Interesting. Okay, and Philip, walk us through some of the breakthroughs in tech that are making this broader adoption of AVs possible.
Yeah, if I just pick on two of these here, I think the models have actually changed a lot. Now, we started with a lot of the rule-based modeling, kind of when we started with autonomous driving and L4 technologies. Now, that has changed significantly. I was actually the other day talking to one of my friends. He's the CEO of one of these AV players, and I asked him the question, if you were to start today And they have been at it maybe, let's say, for 10 years or so. Yeah, if you were to start today, how long would it take you to get to the same point where you are right now? And that CEO said, well, it's going to be far less than 50% of the time. So it has become much more accessible, much easier to get there. And we're also seeing this as we're moving from robotaxi application in one city to another. Each incremental city, actually, to unlock that incremental city has become much, much easier. So in terms of compute and the models that we are using, that certainly is hugely helpful. In terms of sensors, when we started, we had LiDAR sensors in easily the tenth of thousands of dollars. The cost of a lot of the sensor suite on an autonomous vehicle has come down significantly. I think in past car applications where we see LiDARs, for example, being deployed these days, the cost is probably below $1,000 now. So cost has come down quite significantly over time. And obviously, that's going to be hugely important if you think about the economics of running your robotaxi business.
Thanks, Philip. And Ani, let's get back to you. Presumably, some of these same forces play a big role for robotics. Walk us through the kinds of tech shifts that are enabling a new generation of embodied AI and that are accelerating robotics adoption in real-world contexts.
Yeah, I think building up on what Philip talked about in terms of the shift that we saw in autonomous vehicles from rules-based systems to now more end-to-end sort of foundation model-based approaches, I think that's the same underpinning technology shift that's accelerating robotics. And in the case of robotics, there's a strong pull because of the end market conditions. So if you take manufacturing as an example, manufacturing historically has already been a top adopter of automation and robotics. But just the projections of the US Bureau of Labor Statistics suggest that in the next 8 years, we're going to have close to 2 million unfilled manufacturing jobs. So the scope and the impetus to automate is increasing. In the US, only 6% of our factories have automated at scale. And the installation rates of robots in the US are 10 times lower than China right now. And that's driving this sort of almost escalatory dynamics where investments are flowing into robotics. We've seen 25-fold increase over the last 3 years. And that's translating into significant technological progress where models are shifting from programmed rules-based systems to effectively things like vision language action models. So think of these as, how LLMs were for language and translation of sort of that semantic domain. Vision language action models are combining sort of perception, language to understand the context in which the robot is operating, and then give direct instructions to the robot in terms of how to act. That becomes a big unlock, not just from a technological perspective, because the robots are able to do more things, but also in terms of generalizability of the robots, which impacts the economics. So similar to how there was a fear that every city you would deploy an AV at, you would have to do a lot of work from the ground up. That's been a constraint for robotics. Every new application you develop, there's a lot of systems engineering work. There's a lot of bespoke project work that needs to happen to enable it. The more generalizable these technology nodes are, that cost goes away, and it opens up the opportunity for faster adoption in an environment where manufacturers, folks in the logistics space, folks in the construction space are looking at, what are the solutions that are going to unlock productivity. And a lot of this excitement towards generalization, I think, also has opened up a debate on whether to humanoid or not, right? What is the form factor that embodies these models? And I think the last survey we ran, and this survey gets outdated every single time we do it because of how much excitement there is in the field. The last time we surveyed, there were 50 plus companies who are building humanoid robot platforms globally, with the US and China sort of leading that front.
That's incredible. The humanoid robots are incredible. Even I have to say, I identified with that Russian robot that fainted. Felt like we had stage fright. It was like the most bizarre anthropomorphizing. Anyway, so these are some of the tech forces that are propelling robotics forward. What's it going to take beyond that to deploy robots at meaningful scale in the way that we're beginning to see with AVs, Ani?
Yeah. And again, I think maybe we think through sort of the historical drivers for why we haven't automated more in the West. And a lot of it has come down to sort of a business case burden. In an industrial context, adoption of robotics needs to make sense for not just the COO and the operations team, but also the CFO and the finance organization. And that's been one of the big barriers. And when we've surveyed executives, 70% plus of them have called the business case hurdle as one of the major impediments. The second has been, while technologists are developing and sort of throwing amazing technology into the world, you need catchers on the organization side to adopt that technology and to integrate that within their operational context. And that internal capability has been a barrier in many deployments. And so both of them point to this idea of the more generalizable we can make our robotics technology stack, we start improving the economics and we start reducing the burden of what internal capabilities you need to have. And that allows robotics to penetrate not just the large enterprises, but also the small and medium businesses that are a backbone of the industrial economy in the West. In the space of generalizable robots, humanoids are the ones that sort of get most attention. And while the form factor debate in our minds is less important, I think it's more important to think through what are the chasms that humanoids need to cross before they become a commercial reality. And we have these lessons from the autonomous vehicle world of safety has to be paramount. The promise of these robots are that they actually work in a collaborative context with other humans. Historically, robots have been fenced off and operated outside of a domain where they could interact with humans. For humanoids to fulfill their promise, we need to have the right safety standards so that we don't have any incidents, whether it's injuries or fatalities. The second thing is they work in an industrial context where they need to perform the task over a period of a shift. Most of these humanoid robots today are in the early prototype stage, where their runtime lasts 30 minutes to 2 hours, and then you have to charge them again. That's insufficient, especially if you think of an automotive manufacturing plant where you want to run at least an 8-hour shift, and you don't want your worker to constantly be leaving. And then I think finally expanding the capabilities to make these robots much more dexterous, to move a lot of the innovation from R&D to at scale so that we can start automating sort of the frontier opportunities. So an automotive factory, as an example, the body shop, the paint shop are generally quite automated, but final assembly has not been cracked. And part of that has been because we haven't had the dexterity in robots to perform those assembly activities. All in all, we go back to the CFO. If your robot is capable to do the task, it still needs to make business case sense. Humanoid robot platforms today are upwards of $150,000 to $500,000 US. That cost needs to come down closer to $20,000, which we think there is a path to doing so. But once we get to that, you get to another sort of bridge that you've crossed to get over the chasm.
Thank you. Okay, I'm mindful of time. We've been getting a slew of questions on CES. Looking ahead to the event, what innovations or signals should executives interested in these two areas, robotics and AVs, watch for in January? Ani, very briefly, what's your take?
Yeah, I think for me, it's sort of three things. It's understanding where we are on the economics. What is the cost per mile of AVs? As Philip said, are we closer to the $8 per mile, or are we headed towards the $1 or $2 per mile? The same thing on robotics. Where are we on the BOM cost trajectory? Two, looking at the types of deployments and the types of contexts in which robots and AVs are being deployed. What's the operating domain? What's the tasks that they're completing? What are the road conditions they're operating in? And three is, what are the infrastructure needs to enable this? What are we seeing in terms of new compute architectures? What are we seeing in terms of new sensors? What are we seeing in terms of power thermal management solutions? So those would be the three: economics, deployments, and infrastructure for me.
Philip, anything to add there?
I would love to see the new form factors like the robo taxis. I'm sure we're going to see some purpose-built vehicles. I think the interior of the cars are going to change for sure. And then I want to look ahead and say, what are the new forms of AV-enabled mobility going forward? I'm sure we're going to see not only robo-taxis, but autonomous trucking soon. Then we're going to take it in the air. EV toll is probably going to be the next one. And then lastly, autonomous drones, hopefully that deliver to our houses. I literally can't wait to sit on my couch and say to either Alexa or Siri, please get me some chocolate ice cream. And then it will fall from the sky because we have an automated drone that's delivering that one. So that's going to be my personal favorite future.
Super cool. Okay, that brings us to time. This was such a fun discussion. Philip and Ani, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Lucia.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
And as always, many thanks to all of you in our McKinsey Live audience. You can find a replay of this and all previous McKinsey Live conversations on our website, mckinsey.com/live. Next time, we will be talking about what to expect from the meeting on the mountaintop, the World Economic Forum at Davos. That will be January 14th, and you can scan the magical QR code on screen right now to register. Until then, have a great rest of your day and a relaxing holiday break for those who celebrate and are fortunate enough to take a break. Be well and see you in 2026.